next story. For those of you who hold a Kuwaitan pedigree and the accompanying passport that comes with that, you may know some of this next story, but for those of you from Kuwait East, which is what we call this place, the one across the bridge there, you may not know any of this story. But I'd like to give a big common ground welcome now to Lynne Forbes McCoy, and she's going to be telling us her family story.
Thank you, Lisa. Now let the story begin. The place we call home. Our grandfather, John Forbes, was born February 12, 1874, in Echt, Aberdeenshire, Scotland. At the age of 29, he decided to leave Scotland to seek a new life in Canada. After making his way to Liverpool, England, John sailed aboard the ship Parisian, with his destination listed as Rat Portage. Docking on March 15, 1903, he traveled directly to Kuwaitan by train, where he was hired by the Lake of the Woods Milling Company as a night watchman. Isabella Gray MacLeod, our grandmother, was born May 21st, 1880, in New Deer, Aberdeen, Scotland. Following the plan that she and John had made in Scotland, Isabella traveled to Canada approximately 3 months after John's journey. As the story was told years later by John and Isabella's daughter Grace, when Isabella arrived in Kuwaitan, John told her she might as well get back on the train and go home, because he was thinking of returning to Scotland himself. Isabella, however, refused to leave, and she and John were married on July 4th, 1903. Grandma and Grandpa spent the early years of their marriage on Beaton's Island in Darlington Bay on the Winnipeg River. Living conditions were very primitive, with many families living in rough shanties. It was here that their first 3 children were born. Kate in 1904, Grace in 1908, and Jock in 1910. With the size of his family increasing, Grandpa began building a new house on the river at the east end of the back bridge, known today as the Darlington Bay Bridge. 3 more children were born after Grandma and Grandpa moved into their new home. Bess in 1912, Jim in 1915, and Bill in 1918. Life was difficult for our grandparents. Grandpa worked long shifts at the flour mill. During the summer months, he rowed his boat up the river to the mill, where he patrolled as a night watchman. In the early morning, he rowed home to begin his day job, looking after his homestead. With 6 children, Grandma was busy as well. There were chickens to feed and eggs to collect. The girls helped with the cooking and cleaning, and took turns taking care of their younger siblings. The boys were dispatched to fish and to hunt for small game, but deer or moose would have been welcome as well. Meat to grace the table, Grandpa called it. All the children picked berries in the summer and worked in the garden. The Forbes siblings grew up with a strong work ethic, yet knew how to make their own fun. They enjoyed skiing, skating, and sliding during the winter months. In the summer, they had fun swimming in the river, fishing, rowing Grandpa's rowboat, and having picnics. At the time, the back bridge was designed to lift up to allow bigger boats to pass through. The Forbes siblings affectionately called the keeper of the bridge Old Man Daly. They visited him frequently, enjoying the peppermints he always had for them and the stories that he told. He also sang hymns, and his favorite was, "Shall We Gather at the River?" Bess could sing that hymn just like the bridge keeper. In later years, she sang it to her own children, much to their enjoyment. The Forbes kids loved to watch the Camper Special roll in on Friday nights. After stopping at the wooden platform of the CPR station in Kuwaitan, the crowd of passengers would get off carrying their bags down the steep wooden stairs to the dock below. Some of the baggage was thrown into a tin-lined wooden chute and was whisked down to where waiting boats would take the passengers to their destinations on the lake. On one occasion, someone threw a pan of dirty water off the back of the caboose, thoroughly drenching Bess. She never forgot that incident. Sadly, many of our generation did not have the opportunity to know our grandmother. Stories told about her indicate that she was an understanding soul and that she both appreciated and encouraged the varied interests of her children. Grandma saved money from each of Grandpa's paychecks until she had enough to order a piano from Toronto for her family. Grandpa had no knowledge of her plan, and the piano's arrival was quite a surprise. Bess and Jim were fortunate to be able to take a few piano lessons, and both were blessed with the ability to play by ear. The piano became the focal point of many family gatherings, and Grandma would be happy to know that it remains in the Forbes family today, in the home of her great-granddaughter, Renee Raynard, who lives in Calgary. And Renee is here today, by the way. As the Forbes siblings grew up, Jock took up rowing at the rowing club. Their interests turned to parties and dances, and they often walked from Keewatin to the rowing club dances in Kenora. They enjoyed a large circle of friends and had a good time together. Kate was the first to find her soulmate. In 1923, she was married in Keewatin to William Angus McLean. Kate and Bill had 3 sons together, Bill, Dan, and Rod. Grandma suffered ongoing health issues, making it difficult for her to get around and to manage the house and the younger children on her own. At the age of 18, Grace moved to Winnipeg to live with an aunt while taking a business course. Before its completion, however, she made the decision to move back home. With Kate married, Grandma needed Grace's support. Upon her return, she was hired to do the books at Scott's store in Keewatin and managed both working there and helping out at home. Jock had a good friend, William McCoy, known to all as Wugs. And Wugs spent a great deal of time at the Forbes home. Over the years, his interest in Grace became obvious. Grace refused Wugs' proposals many times until she reached the age of 28, going on 29. Only then did she agree to marry him. When Grace and Wugs were married in Keewatin on Groundhog Day, 1935, Grandpa told Wugs that he had saved Grace from the horrors of old maidism. Grace and Wugs had 2 children, Gord and Kathy. Grandma's health continued to decline. After developing pneumonia, she passed away in 1936 at the age of 56. Bess was working at Scott's store by this time, and recognizing the need at home, she left her job to help Grandpa and her younger siblings. Devastated by their difficult loss, the family drew together in support of one another. It is very possible that Bess first met her husband to be at Keewatin Public School, where she and her siblings attended. Louis Contini, known as Lou or Louis, emigrated with his mother from Italy at the age of 12 and attended school in Keewatin. In 1937, Bess and Louis were married in Keewatin the year after Grandma passed away. They were blessed with 4 children, Mario, Betty Lou, John, and Janice. In 1939, Bill and Mary Janet Rutledge were also married in Keewatin. Bill and Mary had 3 children, Gail, Jocelyn, and Scott. Jim, the academic, pursued a career as a school teacher. While teaching in Ingolf, Ontario, he met his future wife, Florence Lenora Knudsen, known as Flo. Their wedding took place in Ingolf in 1940, and the whole Forbes clan, Grandpa included, traveled by train to attend the wedding. Jim and Flo raised 3 children together, Lynne, Nancy, and Gordy. After being wounded overseas during World War II, Jock was sent back to Canada to recover in a hospital in Montreal. It was there that he met his partner, an army nurse, Myrtle May McTavish, Mac for short. Jock and Mac were married in Keewatin in 1945 and were blessed with 2 children, Dennis and Linda. Grandpa continued to live in his home on the river. Our aunties visited him every Monday afternoon and took him enough baking to last the week. He visited his children and their families regularly, having dinner at their homes on certain nights of the week. Grandpa's visits to our parents, Jim and Flo, were on Sundays, and he always sat in the same comfy high-back chair whenever he came to our house. Mom and Dad decided to rearrange the living room furniture, and making a decision they would later regret, Grandpa's chair was moved to the basement. When Grandpa arrived for his next dinner with us, he was very upset to find that his chair was missing. Expressing strong displeasure, he prepared to leave for home without his dinner. A wild scramble ensued as Dad and Mom wrestled the chair from the basement and restored it to its rightful place. Grandpa had made his point, and dinner proceeded as planned. Although that chair was reupholstered after Grandpa passed away, it remained in the living room until years later after the passing of our parents. Our brother Gordy now has Grandpa's chair at his cottage, where it is still in use today. There have been many Grandpa stories told over the years, and the most popular and well-known is the spoon story. Grandpa's favorite trick was to take the hot spoon out of his cup of tea and to touch the arm of the nearest person with it, certainly getting their attention. It's a fact that many unsuspecting souls were caught by this over the years. Another story is that Grandpa liked to offer his visitors a wee dram of whiskey when they came to the house. Jock's son Dennis certainly remembers having a wee dram with Grandpa now and then after helping out in his garden. Flooding on the Winnipeg River has often been disastrous for families living along its banks, and we know of two significant floods that caused problems on Grandpa's property. In 1941, the water rose to a point where it completely submerged the floor of the back bridge. Grandpa's house was surrounded by water, forcing him to use his rowboat in order to get around the yard. More flooding in 1953 prompted Grandpa to build a rough bridge over the high water, enabling him access to his house. Because of his resourcefulness, he managed to stay in his house both times, which is where he wanted to be. Grandpa passed away in 1959. Refusing to go to the hospital, he insisted on staying in the home he had built on the river, the home where he and Grandma had raised their family. His children gathered at the house, and someone was with him at all times during the last days before his death. Once again, they faced a difficult loss together. After Grandpa's death, the house and property sat vacant, until eventually the old house was torn down. Bill, who for years had helped Grandpa with his gardening, continued to plant and tend a garden there. And in time, his daughter Gail and her family had a new house built on the property. Today, Gail's daughter Lynne Smith lives in the house in which she was raised, and on the property which was her great-grandparents' homestead over 100 years ago. The Lake of the Woods Milling Company provided jobs for many people in the town of Keewatin, including a number from the Forbes family. On July 3, 1967, a devastating fire destroyed the flour mill and warehouse, leaving many in the community without jobs. Several members of the family were affected by this tragedy. Jock found employment at the Ministry of Transportation and Communications, where he worked in the radio room until his retirement. Bill accepted a government job, which involved the measuring of water levels in the area. He often could be seen on the bridges between Kenora and Keewatin, lowering his measuring line over the railing and documenting the readings. Grace's husband, Wuggs, was hired by a local painter. Bess's husband, Louis, was forced to move to Medicine Hat, Alberta, and it was a sad day when he, Bess, and Janice left Keewatin. Upon his retirement, they happily made the move back, once again filling the void in the family that had been caused by their absence. From childhood to adulthood, the Forbes kids played pranks on one another, with Jock initiating many of them. Having lost one eye during the war, he had a glass eye, and oh, what fun he had with that over the years. Enjoying his grandkids and their friends in the neighborhood, he would haul them around in his wheelbarrow, at some point announcing that he had to leave. Taking out his glass eye, he would set it down, telling them that although he was leaving, they had to behave. Because he would still be watching them. Jock would then disappear around a corner of the house to wait for the reactions of the kids, which, as you can imagine, were varied and quite hilarious. There were many family gatherings over the years. Special occasions were celebrated with an abundance of good food, and each of the aunties brought their own specialty. Sometimes we had picnics out at Jock and Mac's camp on the Winnipeg River. Other times we gathered at someone's home. Visits from the cousins in Scotland were always welcome, and outings and dinners were planned for them, with each of the siblings and families taking turns hosting. Over the years, several of the family from here traveled to Scotland for visits. The growing bond between the two branches of family strengthened, and everyone came away from those times with memories to treasure. It must be Grandma's purchase of a piano for her family that instilled a love of music in the hearts of her children. All 6 of them could play an instrument, sing, or at the very least move to the beat. Jock always led a sing-song at our family parties, and often played his guitar. With Bess and Jim taking turns on the piano, and Wuggs playing his harmonica, we would gather around to sing all the old songs, many of them from our Scottish heritage. On one of their visits to Keewatin, the Scottish cousins taught us a song called Sukin Blah, which is the Scottish version of the Music Man. One of the instruments in the song is the accordion, which sucks air in and blows it out, therefore, Sukin Blah. Grace and Bess would assign us all instruments, and we had to act out the playing of them when it came to our turn. Sukin Blah was the finale, and everyone sang that verse at the tops of their voices. The evening was never complete until Grace had danced to the Wiggle Waggle o' the Kilt. We were so blessed to have these times, 2 and eventually 3 generations of family having fun together. Jim attempted some songwriting over the years. To express his love of Keewatin, he wrote a song entitled The Place I Call Home. Written in June of 1976, this song became a favorite at family sing-songs and was used on the DVD produced for the Keewatin Centennial celebration in 2008. During World War II, Jock served overseas in the Winnipeg Regiment of the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders of Canada. He earned the rank of Company Sergeant Major. Jock's wife, Mac, was a lieutenant in the Army, serving as a nursing sister. Jim was stationed at several bases across Canada, working in communications technology during his service with the Royal Canadian Air Force. Bill was a flying officer in the Royal Canadian Air Force flying missions over Canada during the war. Wuggs was a corporal in the Royal Canadian Engineers, serving in the United Kingdom and continental Europe. The Forbes family were actively involved in their community. Some took on responsibilities at the Keewatin United Church, now St. Andrews, serving in the United Church women's groups, on committees and the official board, as Sunday school teachers and lay worship leaders, as members of the choir, as church historian, and in the leadership of young people's groups. Jock, Bill, Mary, and Wuggs supported the efforts of the Keewatin Legion through membership and the responsibilities they held while in office. Jock and Bill both served terms as president, and Wuggs served on the executive. They were also members of the Keewatin Legion Band, with Jock on the bass drum and Bill and Wuggs playing the bugle. Wuggs played the last post at Remembrance Day services and funerals. Mary was a long-standing member of the Women's Auxiliary, serving a term as president, and committed to many years of organizing and working at functions held at the Legion Hall. The Legion Band played and marched in the popular holiday parades at Keewatin. In addition to the Forbes present in the band, other family members were involved as well. Whether it was helping with the planning, or dressing up their own children and decorating their bikes for the parade, or manning the booths at the ballpark afterwards, a great deal of time and energy went into making these events fun for everyone. Bess, Louie, and their daughter Betty Lou were instrumental in the successful formation of the first association for the mentally challenged in Keewatin and Kenora. The first meeting with parents was held in 1961. Encouraged by Bess, Louie served on the Keewatin Town Council for several terms and was active in discussion and decisions on important issues. Jim was principal of Keewatin Public School from 1949 to 1964. During this time, a new school was built in 1955, housing one of the first school libraries in the area. Under his administration, the first kindergarten, special education, home economics, industrial arts, and formal physical education classes were developed. In 1963, Keewatin Public School became the first integrated school in Ontario. This event was supported by the National Film Board of Canada in an award-winning documentary, Because They Are Different. In later years, Jim was an active volunteer in many organizations in the community, including the Mather Walls. Grace served on the board of the Children's Aid Society and was secretary of the Home and School Association for Keewatin Public School. Wuggs created the props and scenery for the plays and skits presented by the students at their annual spring concerts held at the Memorial Building. He worked in his basement, bringing his finished products upstairs for Grace's approval. She was his staunch supporter. Jock was a member of the Health Unit Board, and he and Max served the community through their efforts with the Kinsmen and Kinettes. Jock sang in the local men's choir, the Music Men, and in later years was a welcome guest speaker at a number of schools, sharing his war experiences with the students at Remembrance Day assemblies. The first Keewatin Public Library Board was formed in the early 1970s for the purpose of starting a library in the old Keewatin Town Hall on Ottawa Street. With past experience working at the Kenora Public Library, Jim's wife Flo was asked to serve on the board, to supervise the renovation, and to set up the new library. Her efforts were actively supported by Jim and daughter Nancy, and the new library opened in September of 1974, with Flo as the first librarian. Kate supported her husband Bill McLean during his years of service on town council, and eventually as mayor of Keewatin. In the years prior to his death in 1986, Bill was the vision and driving force behind the movement to build the Keewatin Medical Centre on Ottawa Street. His picture, taken at the grand opening in 1985, is still displayed in the clinic today. Kate, dignified, private, the matriarch. Grace, fun-loving, thrifty, good-hearted. Jock, dashing, dramatic, proud. Bess, kind-hearted, fun-loving, a great storyteller. Jim, meticulous, creative, a gentleman. Bill, stubborn, feisty, a tease. They were siblings with different personalities, strengths, and interests, and they were always there for one another. Along with their life partners, they continue to celebrate each other's successes and to reach out to one another during difficult times. They were our parents, hardworking, conscientious, respected people who celebrated their family, Scottish heritage, and community with pride. Their story began with their own parents, John and Isabella, and in a little house on the Winnipeg River at the east end of the Back Bridge. Keewatin was the place they proudly called home. Some of our generation were able to stay in Keewatin and to raise families there. Some were not. Wherever we live now, however, the place in our hearts that we are all proud to call home is the place where we grew up. Keewatin is home to us too, and always will be. Thank you.